Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Overwatch. Lately, we're on a little bit of a hiatus, but we are back to talk everything about BlizzCon Overwatch 2, the new map, some player transfers, some trades, and I thought today would mark a very special occasion. It's our first time ever we have had a repeat guest. He just killed it the last time around, and we were talking about some things about BlizzCon and how things might change after it, and I wanted to just see where Joe was standing on a lot of these opinions. So everyone, welcome back, Joseph Volamel Franco. How you doing, man?
Good. Just kind of sleeping off the convention exhaustion. Trying to fight the con plague, con crud, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, just sleeping. Kind of getting back in the swing of things and getting back to work. But it was a fun weekend, and it was fun to see you and hang out and party and be merry. It was fun.
Oh, yes, there was a lot of be merry going on. Just a little quick tangent for those at home to see like what kind of person I am. There was a cool party that happens every year at the Sheraton. It's like an open patio, so you kind of like BYOB. And so like my bicep here is sore, not because I'm working out. No, I haven't done a push-up in years. It's because I bought a bottle of scotch and I held it for like 4 hours. And I held it like my baby, and it's my scotch muscle now. And I'm so happy to have had it and developed it. And it's going to be great when we do it again next year. But that just kind of goes to show the type of time we had while we were at BlizzCon. So many cool announcements, so many cool cinematics. Joe and I actually roomed together, and he's the cutest little snorer I have ever seen. So it could have been worse, but it was great to learn that about you. Kind of humanized you a little bit.
Well, I'm glad, I guess.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and start talking about the show's called Overwatch Lately. So let's talk about what's been happening in Overwatch lately, because it's been a big old deal recently, because the biggest announcement at BlizzCon for Overwatch was definitely Overwatch 2. So in summary, Overwatch 2 is going to bring all the characters into that sequel, but it's also going to have a lot of PvE elements. So that means player versus environment. So, Junkenstein's Revenge and all of the, archives missions that you had, that's going to be a whole full-blown campaign. And one of the cooler things about it all is that each character that you're going to be able to play in the campaign, you'll be able to upgrade their skills after you level them up. So for example, Tracer will be able to leave bombs when she rewinds, and there's going to be a whole, I think, group of people who might come into the game expecting just to do PvE, right? I think it's a really great way to onboard some people. I'm really excited about it. What were your initial impressions, Volamel?
I mean, it started off with that beautiful cinematic. I think it was absolutely gorgeous, after, the Diablo 4 announcement and, a slew of other announcements. We finally get to Overwatch, closing out opening ceremonies, and we get to see, Genji in his streetwear glory, or whatever, the hype beasts are calling, their new fashion these days. Like, he's out there killing it and jumping off of buildings and coming to save the day. And it was gorgeous. I'd be lying to you if I had to fight back, or if I didn't fight back any kind of like manly tears. I think one may have shed when the heroes won the day and defeated the big bad monster. Blizzard does a good job at pulling at your heartstrings. I thought they were going to kill off May, but I kind of wish that was Brigitte, but say la vie.
One of the funniest parts, dude, was when Reinhardt comes out, right? And he comes out super hardcore, right? Everyone's like so stoked about it, and then Brig comes out right after, and you can feel the whole stadium just get quiet. Like, oh man, way to ruin it.
Yeah, we don't like to talk about her. She's kind of a one of the stepchildren of Overwatch. But all in all, I thought it was a really
They're
cool.
showing it right now.
It was a really cool environment to be in. It's always good. It's always fun to kind of be in crowds of people when they experience something for the first time along with you. But the overall like gameplay stuff, I still think we're kind of getting just the tip of the iceberg. Hopefully, we're gonna have to see. I think a lot of this stuff comes down to execution. I think the PvE stuff, like you said, like is going to draw in a large element of players that not necessarily have been super happy with Overwatch's direction. I was very critical when the game first came out after playing a couple weeks of the open beta and a little bit of the closed beta. The game did feel kind of content shallow. It was just, go in, fight against other people, and that's it. There's really nothing else to it. And yes, they've supported the arcade and they've thrown in the archives. I think they've started to see how well this PvE, the Junkenstein Revenge, the archives, like you mentioned, how well they do. And I think they're starting to really lean into this PvE element. There's a thirst for the lore and the stories of these heroes and how they came to be that we're finally getting a chance to experience. And yeah, I think a lot of people are going to come back. And I also think that'll help the esports side of things. Hopefully, fingers crossed. I think there's a lot to be worked on in that front, but yeah, it's going to come down to execution on the PvE front, and filtering them up to having them watch the esports competitive Overwatch side of things.
Well, I think one of the hardest parts about Overwatch and some other shooters, kind of like, I kind of experienced this when I first started playing Call of Duty, especially in PvP. It's like, if you don't have a campaign mode, right, you're just thrown in, right, to the wolves, and you're facing other people. And when you do poorly, that just doesn't feel good, right? So I think inviting players to do PvE will help their confidence moving up into potentially a PvP round. I think fighting games do a really, really good job 100%. At like leveling their players up, right? Oh, let's give you your campaign so you'll get confident, then you'll get wrecked when you get online. Once you get better than all your friends, you're gonna get wrecked online. But it's like it's a step-by-step process, right? And I think providing PvE gives them an opportunity to get people a little bit more confident into getting into these ranked games. But speaking of rank, something that I was thinking about over the weekend is, WoW raids have gotten super popular lately, and with world records and Method trying to finish these
Mythic plus dungeons super quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think that kind of community might be able to develop here in Overwatch 2?
I do think it's probably had its fledgling beginnings with a lot of the archives events. I've personally seen, the world record on fastest, hardcore Widowmaker, Blackwatch elimination, whatever the heck it was. I think that community has started to cobble together, something to kind of stand on. And I think Overwatch 2 is only going to expand that. I'm willing to even go out there and say that I think that Overwatch 2 at some point will have raids. I think you might cobble together maybe 10 of your friends, probably play very much like we saw in Overwatch 2's, story mode kind of demo. There'll be a set, hero parameters that you're going to have to play within, but you cobble together 10 of your friends and you try to do this hard, content, very much like, a Destiny 2, or I can't even think of anything else that's even similar to kind of like an FPS PvE, raid encounter. But I do think that that's going to be a thing at some point in Overwatch 2's life cycle, or at least Overwatch's life cycle. We kind of have to open the floodgates here. If Overwatch isn't its own entity, the Overwatch universe could be very vast and massive. So this is kind of a watershed moment in Overwatch's life cycle in general.
Yeah, and it's been a while since we've had that. I think their attempts at killing goats was kind of one of those moments too. Is, are you going to be able to successfully move the dial and move this meta along to try to keep your player base healthy? And I think PvE is a good way to do it. It's a great way to start scaling up your player base too, right? Because the thing about Overwatch 2 is it's not a game, if I have like 15 minutes, right, that I'm just going to hop into quick play real quick, right? That's not the type of game this is, because I have to try, you have to focus, and just going into like a PvE round is going to be a little bit better. But my whole thing about this is, and we'll talk about this later, is they already had a hard time developing both Overwatch 2 and Overwatch, right? Now that there's a whole new mode, PvE, do you think that this is something that they're just going to put into the game at the beginning, wait a year, and then add chapters later? How sustainable is developing a player base around PvE? Because really, what is the ultimate goal for them? Is it to help the esports side of thing, or really dive into the lore and the storytelling, which is, I think, what people initially really liked about Overwatch? But like you said, once it came out, it was a little light in the in the story, because the only way that you learned about it was through their own cinematics and through voice lines. And so now they're putting a little bit into it, but how sustainable is that? How do you want them to split their time between PvE and moving Overwatch League into the future?
I think that in general, two ways that I've seen that game development companies really try to grasp and build communities has been around either competition or story. Very, very rarely do you see games kind of move away from those two kind of schools of thought, right? You have, your Witcher 3, that's incredibly story driven. That the gameplay itself is, mildly repetitive, and there is some ways to kind of change that up and increase, the dynamicness of the game. But in general, it's a beautiful story. It's what the game has been built around. Or you have a game like, let's say, Street Fighter, right? A game that's, has a story. It's not necessarily its strong point, but a strong point is about the competition. It's about the, the old arcade scenes. It's about the, me versus you element, my character versus your character. What do we do once we're put into this game and we have to kind of, fight each other in heated battle. It's what grips you. It's what kind of makes you excited to learn more and practice the combos. That's what drives that kind of side of the game. And there are some games that do both of these things very well, Halo, Call of Duty to an extent, that have a very strong story element that drives people to play the game, and they have a very strong multiplayer element that also drives people to play the game. And maybe those two sides clash at times, but at the end of the day, you're under that umbrella. And I think Overwatch can do that, but again, it has to come down to execution. It can't just be another Archives event. It can't just be Junkenstein's Revenge. And it's not just from what we've seen in the demo. We've seen customization. We've seen these items, which, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm not even too sure I have the understanding of it. I don't even know if I have my head wrapped around the items just yet. So I think it's very much still in development. It's not going to be like an Archives. It's not just going to be the same thing you've experienced before. There is going to be customization to it, but it really has to supersede expectations to really kind of bring that other school of thought back into play. We have the multiplayer experience. It's fine. It's there. It's alive for the most part. Is it thriving? That's debatable, but to really fertilize and reinvigorate this whole other side of the game that we've just kind of neglected, it has to be amazing. And I think that's why, as we'll get into, some of the resources have been moving over to Overwatch 2 rather than just working on Overwatch 1. So yes, I think it's sustainable, but it comes down to execution. I think that's the name of the game here.
So I think there's so I was just talking to somebody and someone brought a really good point up. I don't know how I quite feel about this yet, but I thought it was good to talk about, particularly with you and your wrinkled brain, is the fact that what happens when you're done with the story, right? What is next? And this person was arguing, hey, this is just kind of another opportunity for Overwatch to keep selling expansions. They're no longer 100%. Going to need to provide you with Archives or provide you with Junkensteins. They can make you pay for it now because they've set it up with the whole campaign mode. And if you want more of it, just like in Destiny, you can spend $19.99 on a new expansion. And that could be a way to lose players. Like, what do you think about that in terms of just like how Overwatch that feels, in terms of the identity of the game? It feels like we're going into like this campaign mode, but what happens after? What are you going to do?
I think that goes into, well, there's kind of 2 points I want to kind of dive into here. I think that really reveals what was sold to investment groups and a lot of these traditional sports teams that wanted to invest into Overwatch League, where, this one game was supposed to, satiate an entire, global ecosystem for 5+ years. No, of course not. There was other games in development to kind of progress, and that's what was sold to these investment firms, that it wasn't just going to be one game and we're done. No, we're going to, try to build out this entire franchise to be able to move into Overwatch 2, 3, 4, whatever. And that's what they were shown. That's the kind of vision that they were given. Now, when it comes to moving players over, this, that, the other thing, it's a lot more difficult. It's easier said than done to just be able to say, hey, once the story's over, I'm going to expect you to pay for another, $20 expansion set. We've seen that monetization model work in the past, and I'm, going to be completely honest with you. I was actually pretty surprised that we didn't hear that Overwatch 2 is going to be free to play. I still think that's still on the table. I still think that there are alternate monetization options that Overwatch 2 could go with, and I think that you're spot on the money. I think that they will go for an expansion model, much like Destiny 2 has, much like World of Warcraft has. The game's been going on for, going on 2 decades at this point, give or take a few years, but that's been completely, granted, it's very much a subscription-based model, but, supported by a number of expansions that people have to buy and the DLC that comes with it. And I think that's going to be ported over to Overwatch 2. It could just be all free to play. You could just get a full-on battle pass, very much like Fortnite has. But I think it's going to be a completely different monetization thing. I think the story will continue. It'll, you'll get to the end of the story, but there'll be ways of replaying. Like you talked about with World of Warcraft, we have these mythic dungeons that are, you can repeatable and you can race against your friends and this, that, the other thing. That's been a community in and of itself that people have been very excited to play. And maybe you can earn loot boxes and credits. There's the possibilities are endless. And I hate to say it again, but it comes down to the execution of, how much replayability is this game going to have? How much replayability is the story going to have? Are there going to be secret endings? People love that stuff. That has to be included.
I hope so. The secret ending thing, I didn't even think about. Now I'm expecting it. So you're welcome, Blizzard. Volamel has made me expect secret endings. If they're not there, then it's garbage. So anyway, moving. The other thing that a lot of people haven't actually said anything about, because I think one of the more underrated Riot announcements was the fact that they were also providing a PvE game, and so it's kind of like the console wars, right? These companies need to compete. Competition drives improvement, and right now in our battle royale kind of bubble that we've been in for the last 3 years, in my opinion, that genre has almost taken over a little bit too much. It's made moving into other games way more risky, right? Because it's shown to be super successful amongst a large range of people. So it's really nice to see Blizzard and Riot working on games that are outside of this, battle royale PvP area, because the PvE is so much fun. Everyone loved Junkenstein's Revenge when it came out. Those archives everyone loved. So hopefully they can develop a little bit of something with these kinds of players too, because there are a lot of people who just never play ranked, right? They just like Overwatch in the 100%. Style, and they just want to play with their friends. And this is exactly how you're going to be able to do it. We'll talk about splitting attention a little bit later, because it's going to be more apt in a bit, because there was an article that came out from Kotaku that we will talk about. But first, we still got to talk about some of the announcements. Something that we haven't talked about yet was the new map type, which is called Push. So basically, if you've seen the Titan games, it's just an objective, right? And you just push on it with each other, and eventually it'll go to the end, and that's when you win your objective. I'm sure there are people way smarter than me that can describe that a little bit better, but that's pretty much that's the layman's terms, right?
Very generally, yes.
But they're saying, there's going to be a lot of high ground. There's going to be a lot of angles that people can attack this objective. Yeah. But the feedback coming in from BlizzCon is that it was super snowbally and the map might not last very long. But in my head, the opposite could probably be true, where you just get deadlocked for forever. And Overwatch League is planning to utilize this map type when it comes out as their last tiebreaker, so we don't have to see Control 2 times in a row. Not really a problem for me. Control has always been my favorite map type to watch, but you seem excited about that. So give it to me, Mr. Volamel. What is your opinion on, Salt and Peppa's favorite map type, Push?
Push, yes. In general, I think it's bold. I think it's very much driven away. It's very different from the other map types, and from what Toronto, the first revealed map for Push, is kind of showed us, that they're taking a very different stance to developing push maps compared to hybrid and assault and escort, the other 4 kind of core gameplay elements, and push is going to be our 5th, like Boop said, our 5th core gameplay game type being put in the game. So that means it'll be in quick play, then it means it'll be in competitive queue. It'll obviously be available in the workshop and all the fun things that come with that. But it's very different. There's, to kind of expand on the layman's explanation, there's this little robot who is going to be cosplayed at some point, and I can't wait to see, the cosplayer who becomes the push guy, who basically is going to be fought over. The 2 teams are going to be basically fighting over him to push their neutral payloads, basically. Mm-hmm. The problem with that I've seen is that let's say, for instance, let's hypothetical this. Let's say your team, Boop, is pushed, your payload super far into my territory, but we finally win a fight, and now we have to wait for the stupid robot to get all the way back to our cart that's on the other side of the map to actually push it, right? So as we're escorting our little, payload buddy to our payload, you can actually fight us as we're escorting the payload. And I don't know if he stops. I have no clue. That in and of itself is kind of a problem for me, just on its face. When it comes to being snowbally, and the feedback and kind of addressing that feedback, I think that comes from the different aspect of this game mode. It's completely different. The maps are very much more open. And I mean, even the developers said on stage that, a lot of the compositions that you're going to be using in Escort, a lot of the compositions you're going to be using in Assault are one side of the game, and Push and Control are a lot different. They're not really tied to a lot of these point control gameplay elements, where if you're attacking a push cart, or if you're trying to fight over, our battle buddy on Push, we have plenty of other angles to attack from. So that's going to open up a lot more mobile heroes that I don't think people are, putting a lot of stake into, because we're so, used to the meta game around the other 4 game modes at the moment. Push, I think, is going to kind of bust things open, or at least has an opportunity to really open things up because of how open the map is. I think there's a lot of different attack routes, which has been a big criticism of Overwatch in general, is that it's very linear. I go through the choke point, I need my shield, we need to go do things. I think Push actually would have been beautiful to see pre-roll lock. I would have loved to see a number of snipers trying to hold these different angles, and tracers flanking around, and Lucio and Zen, all these different things. I think Push would have been fantastic in, a pre-roll lock era, but with roll lock, I still don't think it's going to be very bad. But I think it is going to be a lot different from what people are experiencing. So I think this maybe, gray area, negative feedback is warranted because it's so different. But once we let things breathe, once we kind of allow the player base to adapt and have guides written and really start to learn how Push works, I think things will be figured out. And I think it'll actually be a fun relief from, how annoying 2CP can be, because God, I hate that game mode sometimes. Playing it's absolutely horrible. Watching it's actually fun. I love watching Assault.
It is. Assault is by far the easiest map type to watch. It makes the most sense, yes. But it does all the things that you said just now that Push kind of eliminates, right? If you're going into Assault, right, say you're on Temple of Anubis B, there's 3 ways to go into the point. That's it. Right? Like, you go through main, you go left or right, right? And so it'll be really good to see something else. So the other thing about Push that's really interesting is I believe the first game mode that doesn't have checkpoints. So you're going to get like a full time bank, and then that's it. So it has got kind of like a finite amount of time to it, which makes it just like the perfect kind of tiebreaker map. You know what I mean? Yep. And it takes track of your furthest distance pushed. So say you push it 30 meters, but the other team pushes it 31. The time bank is over. The team that pushed it 31 meters wins, I believe. So Yeah. So I like that kind of style, but I think you're right. The apprehension is the fact that like this is totally different, right? And the hard part is when you think of the maps that have been new, right? Paris comes to mind immediately. And yes, it's an Assault map, but when you think of the maps that have come out, there hasn't really been an exciting one since Busan, right? I think, and there are problems with Busan too, particularly in my opinion, with Sanctuary, but I just don't like double sniper, so that's a personal opinion.
That's fine.
But when it comes to this, like, we want to be excited about this. We want to look at this and say, this is going to be great. And yeah, it's going to be new. We're going to see new team comps. But the history of what we've seen so far from some of these maps haven't been really great in terms of balance. And a lot of people are just afraid that it's going to be completely imbalanced. No one's going to know what to do. Once they do, everyone's going to be able to just min-max it. What would you say to that person?
I mean, I think a lot of those criticisms are warranted. I think, you bring up some very good points. I don't like playing Paris. I don't particularly like watching Paris. I think that in general, the gameplay or the map design philosophy for Overwatch, 1 in the 4 original core game modes has been lacking, to say the least. Now Push opens us up to a brand new game mode with a map design that is very much the antithesis of, like I said, a lot of the problems that, you know, the 4 game modes that have been originally released with the game have given us. We have literally 360 degrees, you know, attack ability onto the point. Yes, we have that on Escort, let's say, but the map doesn't allow you to very easily get around and to actually flank people. When we talk about flanks in Overwatch, most of the time it's through like a 180 degree attack, you know, radius. Mm-hmm. Now with push, I'm expecting people to actually really dive onto specific points 360 degrees. You know, I'm thinking about playing Zenyatta, and I'm gonna be worried about everything around me because there's so many different ways to attack. But I do think that, you know, a lot of that criticism is warranted. You know, like I said, the maps have not been fantastic. I will agree with that, but you have to realize that this is completely different. New game mode, you know, addressing some of the criticisms that we've given them in the past. So that's, you know, at least should put you at ease. And then, yes, you know, things are going to be weird at first because it's so new. This is a new game mode. We're going to have to figure out what comps work here. You know, what are like the little things that, you know, where are the good sightlines? Where are the good angles? What corners should we play around and where against what composition? Yes, everything's going to be min-maxed out, but that happens with everything.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. What is it in these situations? Yeah, exactly.
So whenever you're trying to win for whatever reason, if it's for money, if it's for pride, if it's because you made a bet on, you know, whoever or whatever, you're going to try to win the best you can. So of course you're going to try and play the best heroes to try and, you know, beat your opponent. I think that's, you know, the nature of competition is to try and better yourself. And I guess that becomes min-maxing. I don't know why that's a bad thing per se.
Well, I'm excited for 2 things because it's a focal objective. I think dive might be really entertaining to see on this particular map. I can see snipers being good too. And the second thing is just like control and assault in terms of the viewer. Actually, less so control. I think control is easier to understand in terms of a game type, but when you're watching it, it can be a little hectic. But particularly assault, this is probably a map type that's going to be easy to watch and understand if you're a new viewer. And we're still onboarding new viewers to the Overwatch League, and I think it's really simple to think, oh, whoever gets this to the end wins, right? Or whoever gets more distance wins. It's hard to, and everyone's kind of at the same focal point too, which should direct the observing pretty well. And so that's kind of what I'm excited about too, just as a caster and as a viewer. I think this one's going to be a little bit more simple to understand just in the grand scheme of things.
I think generally I would agree with that. I think, you know, when we get into, okay, how do they push the payload? It's like, okay, well, what they're actually fighting over is this little robot guy who pushes the payload for them. So, you know, they're not really pushing it right now, but they're escorting the guy that pushes it for them. Yeah. Like it gets a little contrived, and that's something that somehow Blizzard just can't get away from, whether it's, you know, variable numbers and how much time you get per checkpoint, or whatever it is. You know, is it 2? Is it best of 3 on controllers or best of 5? You know, it's never really been figured out. But, you know, generally I would say I could explain this to somebody. Anybody could, you know, anybody who's played the game before could explain it to somebody who hasn't played the game, and I think they should be able to get it.
Awesome. Well, that's the Overwatch BlizzCon announcements. You know, the thing about these kinds of interviews that is always really interesting is we got to dive deep, right? We have to challenge them, and we have to think about it. But after every single conversation I have, even with, you know, the pessimists of the group, and I can be optimistic most of the time, no matter what, I still get excited because there's nothing. It's kind of like when you know, use Listerine and then you spit it out and all of a sudden you're like, yes, that's great, right? And I think Overwatch 2 I think Overwatch 2 might be the cup of coffee that the community needs to kind of get invigorated once more and be excited about something, because it kind of feels like we've been under the pile for a really long time, right? You know, my husband always says, in life, especially at work, you just got to make sure your foot stays on top of the pile. If your foot starts getting buried, then it's going to be way harder to try to do anything. You're going to get stuck, right? And I think we got a little buried there for a while. And I think one of the best ways to get unstuck is just to do something new, right? Splash that water. Yes, exactly. Splash that water in your face and move on to something else, because what we were doing, we got to get away from it for now. Just quickly, we got a couple previews when it came to characters. We got Echo, who for the second year in a row that we only got a visual for. They've obviously been working on her for quite a bit. And then we got Sojourn, who in terms of diversity is 100% welcome into this game. It's our first African American, or it's our first woman of color in terms of Overwatch outside of Symmetra, and so we're really excited. And Sombra counts too, but I think everyone knows what I'm saying. I'm going around it. Yes. I'm excited about it. Representation is really, really good, and she looks pretty sweet. That gun looked kind of like a combination of Baptiste and 76. She strikes me as a DPS character. It'll be great, but she'll be coming out with Overwatch 2 along with a third character. So the number one thing I want to ask you is, if there is a third character, if you can pick anyone from the world, not who you think it's gonna be, but if you could pick one, what kind of character would it be? Is it someone already that we've seen already? What's your pick?
If I had it my way, I'd like to see, I won't say that I'm very much interested in the Overwatch lore. I've dabbled with it a few times. I think it's, it'll be interesting to see, the direction they take with some of these things, but we haven't seen much happening in Junkertown, and we have heard of the Junkertown Queen. Yeah. This kind of deranged, shamble
already.
Yeah, we've seen her presence, through a third party on Junkertown itself, and through Junkrat and Roadhog, and to be fair, Hammond as well. They're all kind of tied with that area and that kind of faction, almost, if you want to kind of call it that. I'd like to see what they do with her. I think that would be kind of interesting. Maybe she'll be like another weird like DPS tank hybrid. I think that would be pretty cool. I think that she could be kind of like a berserker, like jump in, dive, highly mobile, I don't want to say berserker too much, but like that's where my mind goes, like Olaf in League of Legends, where he just goes in, he can't get CC, or she can't get CC'd, and just tears stuff up. So I think that would be pretty cool to see.
Yeah, I want more villains just in general. Yeah. I like playing the bad guys, and we've gotten a lot of good guys, and it's time to play for the other side a little bit more often. So that's going to be it for our summary of what's been going on at BlizzCon, and now we're getting to what I'm really excited to talk about, because I've been saying on Twitter and stuff, I've got opinions, and I definitely have an opinion on this. So Kotaku today released an article. Jeff Kaplan revealed that Overwatch 2 is, quote, 100%, end quote, the reason Overwatch stagnated. So there was, a question of before this, is the reason why development for Overwatch been slowed down because of Overwatch 2? We got that confirmation. And basically, before we get too deep into it, how do you feel about that kind of statement?
I think it's on its face, it doesn't please me, right? It's not a positive thing to hear that, they took a calculated risk in saying, okay, we see what we've done with this iteration of the game. What we're going to do is we're going to move a lot of the resources to the next iteration and hopefully improve them. I think that's, the optimist in me speaking. But yeah, it's not a good thing to hear. In general, there's a lot of, questions I have with that. When were the resources moved? How much of the resources have been moved? What could have been, maybe fixed with Overwatch 1 that wasn't because of these, resources. In general, it's not a good thing. I wouldn't say it's a death knell. I don't think it should be, criticized. I think this happens a lot. I think it specifically, gets talked about a lot with Blizzard games in particular. Kotaku, I believe, maybe even the same author, wrote about this big, hoopla last year with, Diablo 4 trying to be released, and there's this canceled StarCraft game, and that, was moved around. So I think this happens a lot in game development, but it doesn't get talked about. So there's a part of me that is like, okay, I'm glad that you're being transparent, but okay, why are we doing this? What exactly are you aiming to do with this kind of calculated move?
Well, I think, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pontificate, because I've worked in the game industry, right? I'm completely aware of everything that goes into it, and that it's riddled with failed projects, right? Some of our biggest successes came from other people's failures, right? And I completely understand that. So I don't feel like I'm coming from a place of naivete, right?
Sure.
I think the reason why this rubs me the wrong way is because, like you said, one, we didn't know, right?
Yes.
And two, Blizzard throughout, I think, their history has, like you said, has had a hard time being able to do everything, right?
Yeah.
It's been very hard for them to split attention, and now we're coming into Overwatch 2, and they're gonna be doing the same thing, right? Not only are they trying to help PvP out, they're also gonna have a whole other game mode that they're gonna be needing to support for, which is PvE, when they couldn't support Overwatch and small balance changes and Overwatch 2, right? And so what this also does, and I think this is the biggest problem, is it's kind of like the reason why, every time I hear tier 2 Overwatch, it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you call yourself tier 2, you're gonna be tier 2, right? It's forever gonna feel like Overwatch is just waiting for Overwatch 2, and we're just trying to, like, it's kind of like quicksand getting there, right? You feel like this isn't as important anymore. And I think that's just confirmation for a lot of the player base that Blizzard might not necessarily care about what's going on in Overwatch right now, because they're moving all of their focus into Overwatch 2. So are we just going to deal with what's going on in Overwatch? Because there are issues, right? There are definitely some balance issues. And so that's kind of my reaction to all of that. It's, splitting time means that other things are going to suffer, but they haven't yet proven to me that they can split time between two things rather than PvE, PvP, and Overwatch 2, Overwatch League. I mean, there are situations like, why aren't drops enabled for contenders? Why aren't there icons for contenders, right? Like, it feels like they're not speaking to each other within their teams. So how can we feel confident moving forward that Overwatch is going to get the support that they need, in the next couple months while Overwatch 2 gets released? That's what I'm worried about.
No, and I think that, again, I think that's very warranted. I think that that's a lot of people's concerns, is that, we're currently in a meta game that is very not the most interesting to watch. I personally enjoy it. I enjoyed GOATs, but I can understand why the general fan doesn't want to watch two meatballs run at each other constantly, and with some interesting ults kind of thrown in the mix. It is a lot of shooting shields. That's kind of become a meme. Once Project A from Riot Games kind of was teased, it was like, hopefully there's shields for me to shoot because I don't know how to do anything else, right? Like, it's very much become a problem with the game. I don't know that that particular aspect or that particular meme is going to go away anytime soon, but there are problems that should be and hopefully will be addressed. But even going into Overwatch 2, to support your point, from me talking to other experts in the community, a lot of them were hoping that we were going to get a little bit more information about what the next iteration of this hero is going to be. Are they going to be the same here? Are they going to be a little bit different? Where in terms of balance are these heroes going to be? I think a lot of even players were crossing their fingers and saying, well, hopefully this gets fixed in Overwatch 2. Hope just kind of like again, just speculating and kind of making a joke out of it, but still holding some sense of seriousness and concern. And now we have Overwatch 2. It's been announced, but we haven't got that information. Are they going to balance the game a little bit differently? Are they going to take a look at, some of these game modes and possibly rework some of the maps? And we've seen them actually go forth and actually set up a competitive map pool, which is fantastic. I don't believe Paris is in there. So I think, bless RNG. Thank you, Blizzard, Papa Jeffrey. But I think with this, this kind of gap that they've given themselves, it opens them up to hopefully being able to address that in the future, because again, we don't have a release date for Overwatch 2. Hopefully it's coming soon. Hopefully I would expect it to kind of either at latest be like early 2021, or maybe even like holiday 2020 is probably where I'm like ballparking it. But I think that has to be addressed. I think that, if we're going to bring in the PvE side of things and we're going to flesh that out, then we need to actually kind of fix some of the problems, core problems to the competitive side of things. And that doesn't necessarily just mean ranked. That's just, the game, the PvP side of the game that has to be fixed inherently, because, like we've said in the past, there's a lot of there's a lot of problematic things going on, and I think that hopefully with Overwatch 2 they'll have a better idea of how they want to balance things. We have the role queue now that's supposedly supposed to help things be help the developers better balance the game, make it a little bit easier. So hopefully that will be kind of acted upon. So we'll have to see. It's another one of those just holding patterns. We're just kind of sitting on our hands waiting for it, but hopefully it comes.
Yeah, well, I just like I can't wait for people just be like, well, just wait till Overwatch 2. If you have a problem with the game, just wait for Overwatch 2, right?
Oh,
Everything will
started.
be yeah, and that's fine, because something that you mentioned that I think people need to realize is now that they get to come into Overwatch 2 with role lock in mind and develop around that, and I think that's a huge deal, because they automatically get to do better in terms of what kind of game they want and the identity of that game, because role queue is just going to be in it, because there was so much experimentation at the beginning of Overwatch. I think the identity of that game, that's something that we talked about at length last time you were on the show, kind of got muddled, right? Who is it for? What kind of game is it? And now moving in, they can decide, and that's one of the things about Overwatch 2 that I'm super excited about. Again, we can peel back the onion layers and figure out what kind of challenges we might face, but the successes that are possible going into this, I think the fact that they could go into it with a clear mind, with an identity, and have clear expectations on what they want to do, will only make things better for everyone else. It's just a fingers crossed on making sure that when it does come out, the tempo of these patches are going to be better.
It's that execution.
Exactly, because the ideas were there for Overwatch, Overwatch 1 as well, but it's all about that execution, because what is something that a lot of people have said about Blizzard in terms of their other esports is patches come too slow. We live in these metas that aren't that fun to play for way longer than we should, and I wonder what kind of adjustments are moving forward, because now that we're in a different kind of, esports culture than we were 10 years ago with StarCraft, right? We're in a much more immediate gratification type of atmosphere. How do you balance that? And now that they can go into it understanding and knowing these challenges, and that's what's exciting about Overwatch 2. And so now that we're done talking about Overwatch 2 for now, we can talk about something that's pretty great. You were there with me. We got to witness the United States of America win the World Cup at a BlizzCon. We were cheering our butts off. I almost passed out, I think, a couple times.
Few times.
Yeah. When you look behind you and you go, "Hey guys, I've only had coffee and vodka for food today, so you got to get this going," right? we were cheering our hearts out. Yeah. And so we're so excited about that. USA did end up beating China in the finals, and USA was pretty dominant throughout the entire tournament. They looked like the best team the whole time. South Korea ended up not looking that great throughout a lot of this tournament. A lot of mistakes that South Korean teams normally don't make, and so I think the United States was at least a partial favorite going in, and then ended up winning the whole thing. And it's just so great in the esports world to see the US of A finally take something, because it doesn't happen very much. So congratulations. And I agree, Cyberwaste. I think Corey got snubbed. Mushu and I and the rest of the row, we came up with the whole chant for it. You got to go Corey over and over again until you're ready to stop. But anyway, in the end, United States of America, World Cup champions. That feels really good, Volamel. How do you think the event went?
Overall, okay, so I'll put it like this. Overall, I've had my opinion changed on the World Cup in general. This World Cup, I was not particularly happy with. I think the idea of this World Cup was very benevolent. We're going to open the gates. If you can get here, you can compete. Beautiful. That's very nice of Blizzard to do. The problem with that is the logistics. We have teams canceling at the last minute. How does that affect the bracket? Okay, now we have to rework the bracket. How are we getting them to here? We have to get them the jerseys. Okay, cool. Are we going to put their names on the jerseys? No. The entire idea of it gets thrown out the window when you actually look at the logistics of having this many teams try to come here and compete. Do I want that many teams? Yes, I want everybody to be able to, be put on display so that everybody can see how good your country is, and to test, your mettle against the other countries, either in your region or vice versa, right? I think that's fantastic. but it can't be this. It can't just be this mess, this absolute just, run around with our heads cut off chaos, pulling fire alarms, 4 different streams. No, give me a week of competition where everybody gets their fair shake on being on stage and having a proper World Cup experience, whether it be preliminaries. We had preliminaries work in the past. Go look at 2017, 2018. We had individual events scattered across the world where teams could come and compete. If you met that, global SR average or whatever it was, you got to play on land. You got to play it in front of a, albeit, small live audience. You got to experience that, and that was your time to shine. That was your time to kind of experience what it's like being and playing in front of a live crowd and being, I wouldn't say a professional, but just like being thrown into that environment where maybe you weren't in the past, and being able to show that you can rise to the occasion. I would agree with a lot of the sentiment going around that World Cup has given a lot of opportunities, let's say, to a lot of players who might not have had that in the past. Is that always going to be the case? No, but you can't. I don't think we can just cross that off our checklist and just kind of count our chickens before they hatch, right?
Yeah, I mean, Gushue is the big reason why most of us know is because of his performance in World Cup. It got more viewers than any of the contenders games did, right? And it has more eyes just in a singular portion rather than the 5 to 15 over a season across from the contenders teams. But the World Cup has been a little bit more for the audience. Contenders, you have people scouting, you have coaches and stuff looking at them a little bit more over a group of games, because the thing about World Cup that doesn't let is consistency, right? It's 100%. Much easier to play 3 good games over a weekend than it is to play 7 good games over a season, because I think that's one of the biggest things between tier 2 and tier 1 in general is how consistently you can play, right? And I think that's one of the biggest things based off of who gets called up is, can you do this and then recreate it a little bit later as well? And the players like Gushue are able to do it after World Cup, but this time around, a lot of people are talking about Visility, who's been around for a while, and he definitely had his time. But my big thing here is that there's 2 things. One of them is good, and one of them I think is bad. So the good thing here is we saw, especially with people fundraising for these specific teams coming into the World Cup, we saw how strong the community can be and how supportive the community can be. However, I don't think that's exactly how we thought that was going to go, because in my opinion, and this is just all my thought process here, I think this was a way to self-eliminate teams by making it a little harder to come to BlizzCon, that they wouldn't have these games. Maybe the expectation of these fans and these sponsors getting these teams to Blizzard Arena or at BlizzCon was a little bit underestimated. And so what I think this showed was that the community can make things happen, man, with a lot of these teams, getting these sponsorships, sending those emails, and the community helping them come to this competition is a huge deal. But the idea of it was, I think, to self-eliminate and make this a little bit faster going. And, to put it into perspective, I was really excited. Like, Glitch Mob was at BlizzCon. I've wanted to see this band live for a very, very long time. And Overwatch Finals lasted too long, and it was over by the time that we got there. And, those fans have to make that choice. And the goal is to make it so everyone can watch that concert, hear, this, and that. But if you have that many games, if you don't plan enough, then the scheduling just goes to hell. Right. And so in terms of this Overwatch World Cup, that was an issue. And then the second thing I have was more so what happened on the first day. Right. I know that they're going with limited resources. A lot of people are having a hard time getting caught up with it. And I think for what they were given, they tried the best that they could. The casting talent, 100%. The casting talent gave it their all the whole time, right? Yep. And I think the producers and the observers were trying to give it their all the whole time. I mean, what are we going to do when there's a fire alarm, right?
Yeah, no, you can't help that.
And so the hard part is, it's just I feel it in contenders. It's once there's a mistake, right? Once someone misses something, once there's, bad transition, it's any production, right? And that's all we remember. And unfortunately, those small things did kind of add up that first day. It definitely got cleaner as time went on. But as a fan, just in esports in general, because I don't feel like I see it anywhere else outside of League of Legends, and even the international will have internet problems. I just want to come there and them to nail it. You know what I mean? And just to have this be like an amazing event that we don't have to worry about technical issues, you know, and all this other stuff. I think as an industry, we're maybe a little further away from that because who knows? I mean, like there are a lot of people who are in charge of running these tournaments, and sometimes, you know, shit happens. But I'm just waiting for, you know, I think Gauntlet actually got really close to that, where it was like, all right, we're watching and we're just watching. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see us get to that point, because even the NFL has some issues. But I think part of the reason why some people might not see this industry as seriously is because of like simple production issues that seem they might not be simple, but they seem simple. They seem like mistakes as opposed to unavoidable consequences of something else.
I mean, I think that's I would agree with that generally. I think that, you know, we are as mainstream as we think we are, we're still kind of, you know, getting people in positions that, you know, don't have a ton of experience, that, you know, mistakes are bound to happen.
Yep.
I think my biggest criticism is just like the form, not the format in terms of like single elimination, that kind of thing, just the overall like idea that we were just going to invite all these teams, and that couldn't, you know, possibly wherever you kind of fall on it, wherever you think it's, you know, possibly Blizzard trying to like self-eliminate teams with heavy sponsor restrictions and this, that, the other thing, wherever you fall on that, I just don't think you can just leave it open to chance. I think it's probably best to have a closed opportunity to have the players, through some sort of arbitrary metric, come in, show their stuff, and let it be just a closed environment, just a control group, instead of just leaving it up to, you know, hopefully, you know, either the community does or doesn't, and we try to, you know, juggle that around. You know, going back to, you know, the Overwatch 2, it's like, how many different things are we going to be able to manage here when we just leave everything open to chance? I think that's where my biggest criticism was. I'm not necessarily too thrilled with the idea that, you know, the community is trying to pay their country's way there. That feels not great. But in general, I think that it's definitely going to be fixed. I don't think we'll ever see a World Cup like this one again. I'm happy that the USA won. I'm happy that, you know, the end of World Cup was, you know, what we come to expect with Blizzard production. It's fantastic. All the resources are finally focused on actually showing the game and being able to showcase the broadcast talent, the, you know, the broadcasters and the production crew and the actual players, and giving them the proper room to breathe on every angle. But it was just too much all at once, trying to figure things out. It was just a little bit chaotic. Like I said, I don't think we'll ever see a World Cup like this again, for a number of reasons. I think this was a lot of firsts for BlizzCon. You know, looking at Hearthstone, we had our first, you know, woman, you know, kind of winning a major, you know, esports event, you know, in Hearthstone. We saw the USA World Cup team do very well. There was a lot of, you know, big announcements, but the just in general, I don't think we'll see an event like that ever again. I think it'll be much more structured and edible. I think it'll just be better in general. I think it won't be just...
Structure's the word, man. Structure's the word, just in all of esports. We just need a little bit of structure. And structure is like one of the things that kind of feels bad. Like if you've ever worked for a startup, right? If you, like, I was employee like 3 at one of my companies. And even when we got to 20, like we didn't need as much structure when we were like 3 to 6 people, right? We kind of just did our work and it was fun. We came in and we did our things. But once there was 30 people, we needed that structure, and that kind of cramped my style, you know? It didn't feel so good. Change is scary. And so I think just overall, the events like the International that have that structure just are so nice. But as an industry, I think we need to start seeking that structure, creating pipelines and making things standard rather than kind of like shooting at the hip through a lot of these things. I could be wrong in how I'm describing this, but I just also want to say that, like, in other World Cup scenarios, I don't know another World Cup that happens in 3 days, right? In soccer, it's like over a month. The Rugby World Cup was just recently, and it was over a month, right? But it's all about what you have and what you can, right? And we got to kind of figure out where they are. The one thing we can theory craft about Blizzard as a company and what kind of resources they have. You know, we hear statistics of their revenue and stuff like that, but we don't know exactly where that revenue is going. It's a big company and what they're capable of doing. But I would have loved to see regional qualifiers just in general, kind of like how they did a couple years ago when Brazil came out of nowhere, right? And I think it's going to be easier to develop stories, right? Because we probably would have heard about the Netherlands way earlier.
if they were
like
given, a proper chance.
Exactly. And so hopefully we move that way. I think they definitely learned their lessons. One thing that Blizzard does, they adjust, right, for the next year, whether it be a minuscule amount or by, sometimes they overshoot it. But I think in the end, they seem to be refreshed, especially with Overwatch 2, and I'm excited to see what they come in. Again, we can be negative here, but we also have that other side of the equation that we can talk about too, because overall, I've been to 5 BlizzCons. This was the best one. Maybe it was because of who I was around, right? Maybe it was because of, the fun that we were having and the environment, but I've been to other really good BlizzCons before, and this one just felt really good. It felt like Blizzard was truly trying to go back to their roots and speak to the community at large. They tried to admit to that they maybe lost their voice with the community a little bit with all the drama that went on with the Blitzchung situation, and it really seemed like a concerted effort to really talk to the player again rather than a large group of people. It wasn't for them to make money, it was for us to make these games, and that was one of the big things that I saw differently with this BlizzCon versus especially last year's.
No, definitely. I think it started with JL and Brad coming out and, like you said, talking about the controversy in Hearthstone, and then immediately going into an opening ceremony that was much different than what I've experienced. I can't say that I have the actual 5 years under my belt, but I've been to a few before, and this one was very much structured differently. It was jam-packed full of announcements, big and small, and Blizzard doesn't pull any stops when it comes to their cinematics, and it was a lot of tongue-in-cheek. It was a lot of self-reflection. It was a lot of like, haha, we did find out you guys did have phones, and oh, look at the leaks, and Jeffrey Kaplan talking about the Overwatch 2 report, and this, that, the other thing. It was a lot less like suit and tie. It felt like Blizzard was like, okay, you know what, we just need to chill. Like you said, they've lost our voices. Let's try to
all right, guys, we need to just chill the F out, right? Yeah. Like we need to I think they lost themselves a little bit. You know what it reminded me of? Lindsay Lohan and Mean Girls. It was like Blizzard became, or like the movie Heathers, right? You were like part of the cool club for a while, and you kind of forgot about all your friends that helped you get there. And they were like, they snapped back. You're like, okay, we're gonna come back. We're gonna give you what you've asked for, right? Diablo 4 was, rumored to have. They tried to announce it last year, and they weren't able to do it. But part of me is like, that cinematic they put out was one of the best I've seen from them. Yeah. The Lilith at the end was sick, and like I've never wanted to buy like an actual statue of anything before until I saw. Like that was sick, right? The whole thing was awesome. All of the announcements were great, especially after the Riot 10 announcement. Expectations were high, and I think they got there, and I think it made the whole con feel a lot better, because I remember after the whole "don't you guys all have phones?" like the whole con was almost ruined, right? After that situation, it was all anyone could talk about, and this time around we were talking about the games for the first time, not the company, and I was really, really excited about that. And where are you Where are you feeling about the direction of Blizzard?
I think I'm still, slightly jaded in a sense. I hope that communication can start to really foster with Blizzard and Activision Blizzard as an entity, because that's been a big criticism, getting into esports and getting into Overwatch in particular, is it really does feel like there isn't, the left hand doesn't necessarily talk with the right hand, and there are things that go on that, people should know about and they don't, or there are things that have happened that we don't know about. And it's, it has to be, a discussion. It has to be, more communication at its baseline. I think that Blizzard in general is going through a tumultuous time. A lot of the old heads have left. I think a lot of the old creative people are really starting to step away, and there is a change of the guard. I think they're doing fine for themselves. It's just a little bit different. There are very obvious criticisms to make. But maybe this is talk about watershed moments. Maybe this is a watershed moment. Maybe they've finally unbuttoned, gone back, reconnected with the community and are going to, admit when they've done wrong. I think that it's very easy for a company to say that, oh yeah, we admit it, yeah, whatever, okay, you'll forget about this in a month. But how do you actually go about that? How are you actually going to show that you kind of show repentance and feel sorry and you're right, we did mess up. Right? Exactly. So where are those actions going to come into place? How is that going to happen? Or is it just another, sweep it under the rug and have somebody stand on top of it?
Yeah, here's this really here's this nice car, but your old car's still there with all that problems that you're still gonna have to pay for, blah 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 blah, right? Where are we gonna stand on that? But I think we got to move on, man, because we are not gonna get to. I have a lot of we have a lot of player changes, right? So basically, I want you to look at this list, Mr. Volamel, and I want you to tell me which ones you want to talk about, because definitely a lot of changes going on. The Defiant, Legion, Reign, Boston, Justice, all coming out with player roster changes. We actually haven't had a show since a lot of these roster moves have happened. So in my opinion, it feels like, and I want this statistic to be real, like what percentage of the league has changed at this point in time? So, you can kind of freeform it and talk about the changes and the players that you want to talk about for the next 5 minutes. But the other thing that I want to ask you is,
sure,
we're going into the homestands, right? These teams are now going to have to think about who they want to have on their teams for a long period of time now, because I don't think if every season's like this, right, it's sustainable, right? We need some consistency on a lot of these teams, but with esports, that's never really happened, even between contenders teams before Overwatch League, right? It's always been, all right, after every season, this team's completely new, right? Like if we look at the Defiant, everyone is pretty much new, right? Outside of some of the coaching staff and Logics, right? And how now that we're here, right? I think the first 2 seasons of Overwatch League, they were able to say this is an experiment, right? This is the great, we're this is the first time we're doing a lot of these things, and we're getting those growing pains. But in year 3, those have to be solved, right? And that I think that excuse can only go maybe another season, but because of the homestands. But in the end, like, we got to find consistency somewhere, and these rosters, I think, are a good place to start for a lot of these teams. What do you think about that? Because they're going to be traveling with these players, they're going to be paying these players. It's going to be a lot harder to sustain a lot of these players over a long period of time. So it might just be easier to pick your roster and live with it for a couple years.
100%. I think that does kind of stem from the fact that Overwatch is a new game. It's a new esport. It's a new kind of almost genre of video game. So you're getting a lot of people that, you're getting a lot of varying degrees of experience managing and building and having actual structure behind, kind of a company. And it's kind of what this is, right? A franchise in a very loose sense is kind of a company, and you're trying to build what you think is the best company. So you're putting people as CEOs of this, metaphorical company that don't have a ton of experience. So it's okay. Did this work? Okay, it didn't. Okay, reset it all. Nuke it. Get new people in. The consistency will come with experience. Once we get general managers that have a ton of experience. Once we get coaching staffs that have more experience. We can talk about how long Overwatch has been out, but in Blizzard's eyes, it's only been out for 3 years. 2 years. We're going on 3, maybe.
Yeah, so it feels like 10.
No, it feels so very long, but in reality, it's short compared to a lot of other esports, and I think that's why we have these comparisons. And I can tell you firsthand, when we go back and look at Halo and a lot of other team esports, roster changes happen left and right. If we didn't perform at this event, the roster was probably nuked. We take 2 people and we slap together a new roster and we try at the next event. That mentality is slowly shifting away. We started to see teams really invest in the future. We saw Shock invest that with Sinatra and Super. We're only going to see that go in the future. And I think teams have started to really identify their identities. We've seen Boston Uprising really solidify themselves as, you could look at them as, the Boston Bazaar. That's my, favorite one. But, this underdog, I'm not going to use the M word, this weird money ball thing that constantly gets thrown around. They're looking to, build not the best team in the world. They're not trying to shell out the most money, but they're looking at individual talent and focus on scouting. And very much when it comes to Valiant, with this roster that has been announced very cheekily, might I add, Again, very focused on scouting and investing in players that they can grow into the future. But I'll throw this back at you. Do you want to do this like lightning round? Do you want to just focus on one or two and really get a fleshed out opinion?
Let's talk about Valiant just for a second,
Okay,
right? Because Slur, Apply, and Lastro are the signings there. We don't have it's like the one without a graphic. But the reason why I want to talk about this is because those are all, quote unquote, tier 2 players, right?
Sure.
Slur has been talked about in terms of being super coachable for a really long time. Apply, very streaky. I've got some opinions on that, but I think with good coaching and development, he could potentially become a great player. Lastro, same thing. There's some rumors about some attitude things for Sky Foxes. But the reason why I want to talk about Valiant more is I think it speaks to your point of the importance of development. We all knew, and now that we're in season 3, most of the talent that was there before Overwatch League has been picked, has been developed, and some of them have crashed out of the league, right? They're not even playing anymore. And we saw a lot of that with the rumors of, team Jehong or Birdwing retiring, right? It's like, oh, they might not even play another season. They might retire. And I think focus needs to start going into development more so than picking up players that are already good. So it's not about being successful now. It's about being successful over the long term. That's what the Browns are trying to do right now in terms of the NFL. Same thing with, the Dolphins. They're trying to lose now so they can be sustainable in the future and develop these cheap players that they could potentially sell later for better players or become really good players. And I think that's what Valiant's really trying to do here.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. I think that I won't say, because I know that Boston is definitely under new coaching management. I definitely think Mineral has a good head on his shoulders. I have my concerns just in terms of the total hierarchy of Boston and what we've heard kind of come out of, Boston's locker room and how much say some of these coaches actually have. Has that changed? Has it, is it just the same? It's kind of difficult to say at this point. And I put a lot of faith in what Valiant has, because I haven't heard that same criticism, and I know a lot of the coaches and their history and their how the community behind the scenes weighs them and values them. They can't speak highly enough of some of these coaches, and they really do believe that this team could be solid. I don't think they're going to win anything. I don't think any Valiant fans should be looking at a title contention here, but this is a team that will grow with you as a fan. This was a team that is going to really blossom probably towards the end, barring any kind of weird meta changes. But yeah, going even farther, I don't mean to leave him out, but Dreamer, one of the only players that I've seen in recent memory going into this postseason that has come out of what looked like open trials coming in from Australia, or the Australia Pacific region. Nobody had talked to him. I had heard through the grapevine, it was kind of hinted like, hey, when you hear about Valiant's roster and there's just player, you have no idea who he is, let me know and we'll talk, because nobody's gonna know this person, but he's actually pretty good. So I'm cautiously optimistic with this team. Again, do I think that they're going to be super successful? God, no. But they won't be last. And I think this team has room to grow. I think there are pieces that, could be interchangeable. There's players here that have a lot of room to be coached into maybe other roles, this, that, the other thing. I do think Valiant is positioning, like you said, they're taking 2 steps back to reposition, and then go forward. I think that's the best look for them, and I think they'll do okay for themselves. Like I said, I don't think they'll win, but they'll be all right.
I don't think they're trying to win this season. I think they're trying to win in 2 seasons, right? They're looking way farther forward. And again, sustainability is the name of the game. So the next one I wanted to talk about was Gladiators Legion, because I wanted to talk about players like Birdwing and OGE. Birdwing has had a very up and down couple of seasons. He was one of the best players in season 1 when he was on the Spitfire. This last season was very hit and miss. There's been rumors about his, wanting to play the game even. And so a lot of people were really surprised when they saw him get signed to Gladiators Legion, especially since Legion have been, trying their darndest to give themselves a championship team going into next season. The opposite of what Valiant are doing, right? The Legion and the Defiant are looking to compete next year. They're looking to try to win. I think Space was arguably the best player of the World Cup. He'll never win an MVP because that's like the type of player Space is. Even though he'll be the best player, he's not as flashy. His personality isn't as out there as some of the other ones. So it's going to be a little bit harder for him to win that MVP. It's why like a defensive player has never won the Heisman. It's the same kind of situation. But here we have Birdring and OGE on the Legion, two players that have been pretty streaky in their times here. What do you think about those signings?
In general, I've never. Well, I shouldn't say I've never. I think Birdring at his peak in the dive, the Tracer meta, was easily one of the best players in the world, if not in contention for the best. When it comes to the Overwatch League era, I do have to question his consistency. Was that because of the locker room? Was that because of his mental state on this specific team? Is that going to be fixed on the Gladiators? It's so difficult to say. This will be the first time that, at least in my memory, that I can recall, that he'll be playing for what looks like it's going to be a mixed roster. I mean, Space, OG, Birdring, it looks like it's going to be a Western Korean kind of mix. A lot of those same criticism kind of, are applied to OG here. I think he's going through a very similar transition, if, different in terms of severity, but I do think that he's, a little bit burnt out. I think that Birdring definitely is burnt out. I think that, putting a fresh coat of paint on a not the best ever car is not going to change the internal workings of the car. So I worry about, how long Birdring's going to last. It was very much the same thing when I evaluated Fissure last year for Seoul. And rumor has it, possibly maybe even this year, if you've fallen out of love with the game, I really question if they've been completely honest with themselves that they've really fallen back in love with the game. And I think that's a big step to really kind of be done with burnout. I don't think you're ever done with it, really, and it's just a matter of managing it. And is Gladiators going to help OGE and Birdring manage their kind of mental stress and burnout with what looks like 2020 is going to be like the most stressful season? I kind of I'm hesitant to say that that's going to be the case. Gladiators in general hasn't released too much information, so it's tough to talk about the entire roster. But Birdring was not somebody that I was really aiming for or kind of high on even going into this offseason. It's been tumultuous, to say the least, on London. So hopefully they can remold him into something that's better. Maybe it was the environment. I don't know. And OG is definitely solid. We'll have to see what happens with him and Space is, I think you can lean on Space, and he's not going to crack anytime soon. I have my questions about hero pool, this, that, the other thing, but stress aside, I think Space will be just fine.
Well, I think that's going to be it for us today. We had so many other things to talk about, but we needed to talk about BlizzCon. We needed to talk about Overwatch 2. I think there's just so many cool things happening right now. We'll talk a little bit more about rosters next week when I believe we'll have Dogman on the show, which I'm really, really excited about. But that's going to be it for us right now. Thank you so much, Volamel. I always learn so much. It's like taking a college lecture when you're on anything that I'm on. We do a lot of podcasts together. We happen to be invited at the same time a lot, and I always get really excited when we get to do something because I come out of every single one of those experiences knowing something else with an extra wrinkle in my brain. So thank you so much for that. And you've been coming out with some content lately. Where can we find it?
Yeah, you can find me on all the social medias at Volamel. That's Volamel. Currently just wrapped up a kind of answering the question of why Overwatch 2, why a sequel. I kind of give my thoughts on why Blizzard may have wanted to look for a sequel rather than a DLC or an expansion, something like that. I am going to probably give my opinions on a lot of these roster moves, or at least the ones that are super interesting to me, on my YouTube channel, which again, you can follow me at Volamel. But other than that, yeah, just typical working, writing, producing, my 2 cents on anything and everything. So yeah, that's just what's going on in my daily life. And thank you for having me on.
Of course, man, any time. And before we go, I just want to say thank you to the person who decided to get rid of the 4-map set, because Overwatch League is moving to a best of 3. I think everyone that is just a general blanket. Thank you. So again, those decisions make us excited for the future. You can find me at Boopasaurus Rex on Twitter if you want to stay up to date with what I'm up to, as well in my casting life, as well as when Overwatch Lately will come back. We're gonna have we've got some really cool guests lined up for the next couple weeks. I'm really excited for what we're gonna bring you guys who are watching and supporting the show. Follow and subscribe UGC if you want to see the other shows as well. We've got a Halo show, we've got a Rocket League show. It's all really, really good stuff. Some really great production as well. So definitely check it out and stay tuned for the other stuff too. Once again, I've been a Boopasaurus, and that's been what's happening in Overwatch lately. Come again next time. We'll see you next week.